Today on What is Tabletop, we're discussing mass combat. War. What is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
Say it again.
Absolutely nothing.
That was perfect.
I feel like this was rehearsed a little too much for our liking. But anyway, welcome to What is Tabletop. I'm Frank. I have been GMing for over 10 years, and with me is Charles.
Hey, it's me, Charles, the guy who's here.
He likes to quote songs.
I do like to quote songs.
Name a song right now.
Wow, that really put me on the spot. Happy birthday.
I was like, you can't name a single
I was
song.
like, wow. Dizzy Up the Girl. Wait, that's an album.
What?
Goo Goo Dolls. I'm sorry. What 90s?
You go with Goo Goo Dolls out of anything you could have chosen.
Dolls. I love them.
Even though he might want to be stronger like Britney Spears, we're going to move on from this.
That sounds kind of toxic.
I can't think of a third Britney Spears.
Oops, I did it again.
Dang it.
Hit me one more time.
All right, so we're going to stop in the name of love and
Yes.
move on to this next episode of the podcast. Charles, what are we talking about?
So yeah, we're talking about mass combat and how to run it. You know, what are some things you could include? How to maybe streamline the process so you're not doing it for like 6 sessions in a row. Things of that nature. Because
there's a lot of different ways you can do it, and I've talked to various other GMs about how they do it. Sometimes you just steal from a book. No spoilers here, but sometimes you also come up with rules yourself, and sometimes the rules you come up with aren't necessarily thematically resonant with what you're trying to do with mass combat. So we're going to be talking about all that. But before we do, subscribe, because we want to hit 1,000 subscribers. And I think if we tell you to subscribe, somehow you subscribe more. I don't understand how that works. Charles?
we put that fancy subscribe button in the last video, and and just wow.
Yeah, it's going to appear again right now. Ooh.
We're magic.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right, so let's talk about mass combat. So we already know what mass combat is. That's when you're fighting a bunch of
enemies.
Enemies.
It's
when you're fighting
anemones.
It's when you're fighting a bunch of sea anemones at once. It's when you're fighting a bunch of enemies at one time.
Right.
So how does that work? Like in any system in general?
So I would say most systems, unless they have rules baked in for mass combat, you're not going to find good rules for it. Because most of the time, depending on your system, but let's be honest, most of the time, it's your party versus things that your party could conquer. You have to figure out for your system, okay, like, can our superhero-like fantasy characters fight a horde of an army? Cool, then you don't have to change the mechanics too much. But now let's say that those players have amassed an army themselves.
Okay.
Well, how do you run that? Do you just do a war game? Like, do you just bust out your 40k models and start shamming them together and rolling a bunch of d6s? Or do you have some other means to do that? And so we're going to talk about like the different ways that you could resolve that outside of the system that you're doing. Again, if you have a system that has mass combat rules, I highly recommend just using those mass combat rules. And usually they will tell you this is for main combat. This is for single combat, stuff like that. So that's like the generic advice I would give before we go into more specifics.
Bringing out a bunch of like minis just to do this mass combat, you know, and especially like, you know, sessions can run long. So how can we streamline this process? What is one way we can streamline this process?
So the most streamlined you can get is literally having it be one roll.
Okay.
Right? So for example, it's literally just rolling the d20. Do you beat the target number? Congratulations, your side won a war. That is the simplest version you can do. You can also then do additional things where it's like, okay, you've mustered an army. That gives you a +2 to the roll. All right. You've done some reconnaissance. That gives you a +1. Stuff like that. So like that way that whatever your party has done actually can contribute to the overall narrative and also the roll that happens. I will say, it's kind of lame to be like, we're going to have this massive battle. All right, roll a d20. 15. All right, you succeed. Right?
Yeah, that seems a little too streamlined, I think. So, I mean, again, if you're in a hurry type thing, if you're one of those things like, okay, we got to run this combat quickly.
Right.
It could work in a pinch. But what if you don't want it that streamlined? Like, what's another?
You could do opposing rolls and do it like as a series of checks. So one guy who I was talking to was saying how he would roll a D100 against his players, and whichever side rolled higher got like a tally mark, and then at the end of the encounter, whoever had the most tally marks is the team that won. So you could do that. Again, I feel like there's not as much fun from the player perspective outside of just one roll. I mean, sometimes it can be. This is really good for, like, say, having your players fight the bad guy and then your armies fight down the hill. So that way your players get to have like the big climactic battle against the evil guy one-on-one, but then at the same time you're reflecting what's happening in the battle down there. And I think that could work. Again, you're kind of getting rid of a lot of the fun that can be had with mass combat. What I find is like people who want war in their games, they want it because there's a lot of different tactics you can do, right? There's a lot of different ways you can go around it and do that, like the different types of strategies, right? Do you
tactics,
right?
Yeah.
Do you split your groups in order to like pincer maneuver them? Do you want to have your archers in the back or in the front? Spoilers, you want them in the back, right? But like those are the kind of tactical plays that like you can't really do if you're just doing single rolls that decide the fate of the entire army. Which is, it's okay. You can do that, especially if it's like, oh, I didn't realize this war was going to happen and it's happening in like one session and I don't have the means to get all of the supplies that I might need or come up with a custom mechanic or anything like that. I think that stuff works pretty well.
If you're not prepared for it, you could always lead it into like just a massive battle. Maybe not quite a war, but like just massive battle where it's like, okay, we're going to do a couple of rolls here, to see who comes out on top. And then, but this is going to, depending on what's rolled, can lead to other consequences. Kind of have like maybe some, what was it, the degrees of successes and failures and things like that. I imagine that would work pretty well in this situation as well.
Yeah, you could definitely have that where it's like, okay, you do an attack and, oh, you actually did 5 higher than you were supposed to. Cool. Now an additional effect happens.
Yeah.
You could definitely do that. There's another kind of mass combat that's outside of war, which is just your players versus an unstoppable, unyielding force. Think like Kingdom Hearts 2 when Sora fights like the 1,000 Heartless, or like in The Walking Dead where they've had to fight hordes of zombies, right? Those are mass combat as well. And so in those moments, having one die roll, not as fun, but you don't have massive armies clashing either. So that one can be a little tough because if you just do it rules as written, where it's like, all right, here's my player, and then each of the 100 or so minions are going to attack. Well, that's a long time, right? And so I would recommend if you're going to do something like that, you need to have it be like clusters. You need to be like, okay, this group of 25 skeletons that's attacking the party only get one attack roll, but they do a lot of damage to signify that it's the army that does it, right? It's kind of what war games do, where you have like an entire battalion and they all fire at somebody, and then you confirm the fire, and then you roll for damage. You're rolling for the entire unit, and you're seeing how much of that unit actually hit. You're not doing each individual member of the unit, because, golly, that would take so long.
Yeah, in my old man brain, what I started thinking about is, like, risk. Like, how you set up to, tactically to take over certain things and whatnot. And spoiler alert, I am not good at that stuff at all. So it would benefit me from being in a party. So... okay, so you mentioned having, the party basically against an unstoppable force. What are some other ways we can incorporate that?
There's another one, and it's going to make your players feel really cool. Make every single one of those people a minion. Like in 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, they introduced the minion rule, which means that they have 1 hit point. They act like normal monsters, but any amount of damage that's done to them knocks them out. Do that. And then, you would be able to do some really like cool stuff. So you can have it be where there's 100+ skeletons attacking the party, but every point of damage they do is 1 minion that's felled. So you can do those like huge numbers of like, you have 1,000. So basically you're saying this is 1,000 hit points, or this is 500 hit points, however many enemies you want to do. And so when they're fighting the horde, that's what they're doing. So basically it becomes one large cluster, and then you're just sweeping them off. Then you can have like the wizard cast fireball and it destroys a bunch of them. But then the fighter who only gets like 1 attack, it's like, well, you killed 1 guy. Like, that's not as fun as the wizard doing fireball. So having it be based off of how much damage you do, you can then also flavor it really well, where it's like, all right, you did 12 damage with that 1 sword strike. All right, you ram into one and like slice him. The bones go flying and hit several other skeletons that knock them out as well, right? Yeah. You can do some more unique and interesting things that way.
Yeah, and it sounds like also like when you're running a mass combat, especially if you want to make it enjoyable for the players, you want to be make sure your narrative is on point, like the way you're describing things happen. Because again, it's like, oh, okay, you took out 3. All right, that's cool and all, but like, how did I take that? Like having your players either describe or having the GM describe it, I think it makes it a little more fun, a little more invest a little bit more. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really cool. I'll do that. So
yeah, and honestly, I would only recommend mass combat for high levels of play.
I agree.
Right, because you get to that point where the players get to like feel like they're heroes and cool stuff. They get to do these things. Now, obviously, there's gonna be some systems out there that allow you like are skill based, and so that you could probably do at a later point. But I would say this is usually like a later campaign thing that you want to worry about. And it's honestly, it's a moment that's just really cool for your players. You don't necessarily have to have mass combat be this unstoppable thing. If it feels like it by just the sheer fact that there's 500 skeletons or 500 zombies or 500 dragonborn, whatever it may be, having the party fight off that sheer number of creatures is the fun of it. And it can also just show you that like, oh yeah, this is going to be a daunting task. But then once they get down to the last like 40, they're gonna be like, oh, we got this. And it's a really cool moment. In one of my campaigns, I introduced Strahd into the campaign, and the players were rallying troops in order to take on Strahd. And as they were doing that, a bunch of skeletons started showing up. So what I did in that moment was I had their troops, instead of acting as players, they were there to guard and try to make a path towards Strahd's castle. Right. So these skeletons are coming and they're attacking, and most of them are going off. And I'm like, okay, but these ones get into your section. So what do you guys do? So like suddenly 50 skeletons get in, and next round 50 more skeletons are going to get in. But the army that they mustered is pushing away hundreds of skeletons. Yeah. Right. And so that's a cool moment because it showed like the players, okay, you actually, what you were doing, what you were building towards getting this army is benefiting you right now, because you would be overwhelmed with skeletons, but now you're only fighting 50. And so what are you going to like, how are you going to manage that? And that's when I use the rules of like each point of damage kills one of those. So you just have to do 50 points of damage around, and then you're going to be able to move up further into the game.
How long do you let this go on for typically?
I would say no longer than a session. Okay. Unless the like mass combat is a pivotal point. Gotcha. So like if you are doing a war, the war, in my opinion, should not be ended in one session. Okay. A battle can, but the war itself should be going on for much longer than that. And you can have it be multiple battles and stuff like that. You can even have it be, if it's the big final battle, you could have it be multiple sessions, but ultimately you don't want it to go on for too long, because then it just gets monotonous. And it's like, okay, yep, we're going to do the same things we did here. We're going to do this. We're going to attack with our cannons. We're going to have the dragon riders breathe fire. And, you know, it becomes a little tedious, which maybe there's a point to that with like war. It's like, oh, war's tedious? Oh, that's interesting.
Are there any other methods of incorporating, again, your players into a mass combat, mass battle, where maybe it even gets them more involved?
Yeah. So Matt Colville from MCDM, they came up with a few books. Most of them are displayed out here, but the big one is what was it? Kingdoms and Warfare. So they had strongholds and followers, where you got to make your own stronghold and you could do things and add to it. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Followers eventually show up. It's basically a very old school style of play where it's like you find this keep, it's yours now, people are coming to aid you, stuff like that. Kingdom of Warfare is like, and now people are going to attack your keep.
So that's like tower defense right there then.
Yes, this is tower defense to some extent. Cool. But I found that the rules themselves that they have for warfare are so good, you could use them in almost anything. Like whether you're the ones attacking or whether you're the ones defending, you can use those rules.
Oh, awesome.
Basically what they did is they came up with these little cards, and each card has a health value represented by a die size. So it's like 12, 8, 6, so on and so forth. They also do damage, and they also have an attack and damage modifier. So basically, very much like a war game, you choose a unit, you choose what unit they're attacking, you roll their attack against the other unit's defense, then you roll damage against their like wound threshold, basically. And if you succeed, you do whatever damage that battalion does to that thing, to that other army.
So does that army have its own health bar type thing, where it's like, unlike the minions where it's just one hit point, it's like, okay, this is a battalion, but this battalion, instead of we have 50 individual 1 hit points, this is just 50 hit points.
Right. Gotcha. So like, for example, they'll have like a bunch of wyvern riders as a unit, and it's like they have a unit health of 6. So you could say there are 6 wyvern riders, or you could say there are 60, right? And every hit, 10 of them are gone, right? You could do something like that.
That's cool.
And so that's like the nice part of it. Here's what I really enjoyed about it, is the fact that the party does not have to partake in that war. So for example, we used this exact rule set in our last full D&D campaign, where the party decided that they were going to have their ships. They have a fleet of ships that they were going to attack this Mind Flayer stronghold for. They split the ships in half to do a pincer maneuver, and that gave their main ship the tactical ability to then just kind of stealth their way in to attack the Mind Flayers head on. Yeah. Unfortunately, though, there was a spy amongst you, and so that information got out, and the party had to fight this big, like, metal dragon. But while you guys were fighting a metal dragon, you also then got to use the warfare rules where basically someone's turn would go. Your turn ends, you pick a unit that's on your side, you have them attack one of the enemy units. Then when the enemy's turn ends, I have the enemy units attack which units I want. Yeah. And you get to have that process happen. So you're having, like we said, this big epic battle that's more personal amongst the party, while also the grander scale of warfare combat happening on the ends, which with players getting to make some tactical choices, because there's also special abilities and stuff like that. So the party choosing, like, we need this guy to attack this guy so they don't do that much damage. It becomes a lot more interesting, but also it's much more streamlined than having, again, a war game going on, which is the most extreme example you could do. It's just pulling out miniatures and having a war game.
Yeah, which I guess could be fun, again, depending on your play style and depending on who you're playing with. You know, again, I, as much as I love combat, I also love the role play, the RP part of tabletop role playing. You're thinking, oh, what's one way we can immerse our players into, you know, this battle, into this mass warfare? Like, what are some things a GM could do to help get their players, you know, bought into it, especially people like me who really like the RP section of it?
Yeah, having stakes is a really good thing. If your party's going to war and they don't know why, that's pretty bad. Just like if you're like going to fight a big bad and you're not entirely sure why you're fighting the big bad, like that means the stakes aren't there. And like, we understand it's a D&D game and you're going to be fighting monsters and you're going to be eventually finding the final big boss, right? Just like a video game. But like, if there aren't personal stakes for it, there's no point. So you can have many reasons, right? It can be as simple as you're defending your stronghold, right? The villain found out you guys have a stronghold, they're attacking the stronghold. It could be as simple as you guys are escaping this undead lair, but there's thousands of skeletons and you need to escape, right? So it's more about surviving than it is about winning the fight.
Yeah, that makes you think of the that one mission in Mass Effect where you have to leave and not kill the people because it's really hard because you're being swarmed by them,
right?
And, you know, and they're infected, so you're like, oh, I don't want to kill these people, but they're attacking me. So I like the high stakes things. Again, the more invested I think your characters can be in the war, the better. I think also it would be fun to start off a game with your characters just in a war.
Oh yeah,
and they're not sure why they're fighting a war. Like they're like foot soldiers basically.
Well, yeah. I mean, spoilers for possible future campaigns. We're just gonna cut to that for real quick. I do think that is an interesting thing if you make that the theme ahead of time. Like, you guys are in this war. Why is your character in this war? It needs to be a personal reason. It's like, well, my character fights for country. Like, he has been indoctrinated to think that he has to fight for this country. He doesn't know what the war's about. He just knows that these people are trying to take away our plums or something, and we need to stop them from taking our plums. You could have stuff like that, which is interesting. But again, that needs to be the focal point of it. I have found that I don't necessarily have to plan for a war in my own games.
There's a reason why he doesn't have to play for wars, because it seems like just wars happen in his campaigns.
No, honestly, what happens is most of the players decide the best thing we can do is attack this head on. Oh, hey, we have all these allies now. Let's use that.
Yeah.
So in my college campaign, I had them all get captured and become slaves who went to a gladiator pit. Right. And I asked them, like, what happened to you to get captured? And like, they all ended up doing that. They escaped the island and decided immediately, we got to free all the other slaves, which props to my players for like just being like, no, we're going to do the morally objectively good thing. Yeah. And so they were like, we need to amass an army. We need to attack. We need to do all these things. And so I had to be like, okay, I got to start planning for that now because they're telling me we're doing this. Then it was about amassing these assets and getting these assets. And it was actually really cool where like we got to eventually have the big fight where it's like each of them were on different boats with the units that they had, and they got to have some like RP moments before they then like climbed their way to the middle and overtook the government, only for the real big bads to be like, yes, actually, we're allowing you to do this. Consider it grace that you live this time, and then leave before they're like, no, we got to find out who those guys are.
Yeah.
I found that usually what will happen is your players have either intentionally or not intentionally gained a bunch of allies. You put a big massive threat in front of them, and they're like, we're gonna mass an army, right? Critical Role did that. They had a bunch of dragons attack, and what did they inherently do? They had them make an army to fight the dragons several times. So that's like where the stakes come in, is most of the time your players are going to be the ones being like, we want to make a war happen. How do we do this?
It's all about the stakes, about, how does it fit in the narrative too? Because you don't want to shoehorn in a mass combat. No. And, make sure it makes sense in the realm of your world and your story. And so, and again, it's really easy because almost every tabletop story game out there, or every fantasy setting, especially, like, there's always some sort of corruption going on.
Right.
So mass combat is not hard to find. It's easy to come up, like, for a reason. In my opinion, it's easy to come up with a reason why. Actually, let's go into that question. Like, what are some reasons we can incorporate mass combat? Like, what are some, outside of just, I want to have mass combat, what are some narrative reasons we can have mass combat?
Yeah. I mean, you could literally have it be like with our pirate campaign where we're going into the final battle. We want to make sure we use everything to our advantage.
Right.
And also then the tragedy of losing all that stuff. When we did the warfare from MCDM and one of the ships was destroyed, it wasn't just, oh, there goes one of our ships. It was, wait, we put Joppa, our guy, our friend, as the captain of that ship. Is he okay? I remember you guys being like, is he dead? And I'm like, well, we can, you know what? For each captain, for each named NPC, we will roll a D100 to see if they survive or not. And I think Joppa barely survived, but he was like clinging to some sort of driftwood, right?
He was our Jack from Titanic.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, if you have notable NPCs there, now suddenly these aren't just generic units who are just fighting for your amusement. It's, oh no, our friend's battalion got destroyed. Now it's even more personal than it was before. Yeah. So I say that's one way to do it as well. Again, the motivation I find is just, you can have it baked into the theme overall, have it be a war. I don't know. From what I've found, anytime there's a war plot in a D&D campaign, the players inevitably never want to be a part of it. It's almost as if they know ahead of time. They're like, oh, it's a war plot. We already know that both sides are wrong, and they both have complicated moral issues. So we're going to choose the side of neither.
We're going to fight both armies.
Or neither armies.
Or neither army, yeah.
Right, which is, I'm like, I guess that's fair. Like, but like, come on, guys, let's just do the war plot.
There's a suggestion within there too. Like, maybe, if you're a player, have a character who's really invested in one side, and that, really, have them work hard to maybe even try to convince the rest of their party to join their side. Or, again, you don't want to go full PvP type thing, but like, it can make for some interesting dramatic moments, or maybe even have that person realize maybe the other side's not so bad,
right?
Like, there's some good narrative moments in there.
And let's go to mass combat outside of war.
Yes.
Right? Like, just the hordes of it. That should be when you're in, again, some sort of big final boss fight. Maybe it's a contingency that the boss has. Like, if I die, my minions are going to overwhelm you. Right. That is, like, baked into who they are. That could be an interesting thing. You could also have a situation where maybe the mass combat, the people they're fighting are, like, mind controlled by a villain. And so now it's not just, like, if we kill these guys, we're killing innocent civilians. Are we okay with that? Yeah. Right? And maybe you have murder hobos and they're always okay with that. Maybe you don't, and you have some more, like, complexity in there, but bringing interesting stakes to that. Yeah, I think mass combat is a tool in the GM's arsenal, and sometimes that tool is used by the players and the GM has to adapt, and sometimes the GM can predict it. Right? Again, if you go into, like, if the narrative is this evil blight is slowly taking over the world and it has a bunch of minions that are, like, going there, you can scare the party by having them unintentionally go to where this blight has already been and seeing the necrotic damage that it's done. And then suddenly all these zombies come up. And now it's like, oh man, we got to just go back to where the zombies aren't. Like, we just have to leave. So you're foreshadowing a future thing, a future threat. And then also, when they come back to it and eventually have to fight the zombies again and they're higher level or more powerful or whatever it may be, now they get to see the character growth that's come from that too.
Absolutely. So hopefully that was helpful to all our viewers out there. And again, we're so thankful that you guys are subscribing and liking and telling people. We appreciate you guys commenting. And speaking of which, I recently put out a question out there. We're trying to put out more content. We want to make sure we are interacting with you guys. We're slowly building a website, things like that. We're looking to, like, start having merchandise. But one thing we're looking to do is, I know that we have a lot of potential GMs out there and GMs out there who maybe struggle with figuring out what to do during certain things. We would love to get some questions from you guys. I've already got a couple in. So yeah, so if you have any questions as a GM or if you want to be a GM, so just let us know what kind of things you'd want to learn, or or even if it's something you already know, maybe just more insight on how to GM. Because I know I've learned a lot from Frank. I haven't GM'd a whole lot, but I am in the process of starting a GMing a game for Kids on Bikes, and I've taken a lot of what Frank has taught me to kind of help me with those things.
Yeah, honestly, we might have already posted the first episode. The first episode is going to be on how do you challenge your players, especially when they're like super powerful. That came from our superhero episode, where someone was just like, how do you challenge them? And I gave them a little combat, and they're like, I would love to see how you prep for that. And I'm like, okay, we're going to make a video about that for sure. And so there's a few other comments that are already got a few ideas for, and those will be released coinciding with this podcast that we do. Those are going to be a little bit more shorter, just because that gives me a little bit more time to pump them out and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
And then hopefully it means more of you will be out there to like, comment, and subscribe, because please like, comment, and subscribe. Our last video is doing already good.
Gangbusters.
We're not gonna say when we're recording this, but it's only been one day and we only had 1,000 views on it. So.
Yeah, well, we're pretty. Again, guys, we're so grateful. Again, I know sometimes it could be a bit much to watch these videos, but we appreciate everything, any kind of attention we get from these, really. And again, if there's something you want to see us do, reach out to us. We will typically respond. There's very few times we don't respond to a comment. Sometimes Frank does it, sometimes I do it, and you usually know which one we're talking to because we'll tag our name in there. So again, if there's something you want to see, something you're interested in, again, we have a lot of things in the pipeline right now. We are just, we're grateful for the growth we've seen, and we cannot wait to show you guys what we have in store.
Yeah, the nice thing about being smaller creators is we can actually respond to you guys. So use that before it becomes too late. And also, our friend Peter over at Tales of Elsewhere beat us in subscribers. So like we gotta beat him. Yeah. I don't like this. I don't like that Peter's beating us in subscribers. So
however, congrats to Peter on that. That's awesome,
job,
dude. That's awesome. We're super happy for you, and we really do wish the best for you.
Yeah, but we will beat you in subscribers, Peter. I will do it.
I love this competition. It's friendly, right?
Yes. Just so he comes on the podcast again. Yes.
Oh, Peter, yeah. We love you, Peter.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, really enjoyed that. So speaking of which, you can see that video right here of me talking to Peter. Otherwise, I think we're good, right, Charles?
Yeah, I think so. And as always, stay witty.
I think it was good. Yeah. No, it's great.